So as I said, in the section that we looked at last week, Jesus showed us his authority by by being able to heal 3 different people. And following that story, we see here this story of 2 potential disciples. And what Jesus does in this moment is shows us the steep cost of what it means to follow Jesus. Matthew here introduces to us 2 people who seem to eagerly want to be his followers. I mean, they call out to him. He's not calling them like he does the 12 disciples to become apostles. These people call out to him. But in this exchange, Jesus doesn't immediately welcome them in. And in fact, they have to process exactly what it means to follow Jesus. And when they begin to really understand the cost, we see them begin to make excuses. And what it reveals to us is that as they're negotiating their commitment to Jesus, they're really not followers of Jesus. They're really not interested in being disciples of Jesus. They're really just fans of Jesus. They like being around him. They like being in the entourage, if you will. They like to be able to rub elbows. They might like the spotlight. But following Jesus involves more than just a casual connection with him. And the reason for this is because Jesus is worthy of so much more than just a casual connection. What we see in this first exchange with this disciple is that Jesus is worthy of unconditional trust. Jesus is worthy of unconditional trust. There in verse 18, Jesus sees that large crowd. Remember, he's come down from the mountain. The crowds are still there. He's healed in Capernaum. The crowds are still there. And because of this, Jesus wants to withdraw. He gets to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and there in verse 19, a scribe approaches him. And remember who a scribe is now. He knows the law. He's part of, that religious sect that actually will try and inscribe it and be able to write it down, so they study it, they know it. They're a teacher. They're not on the same level as a rabbi, but they know the word. They know the law. And this individual comes to him and says, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Now think about what he's saying here. One, as a Jewish religious leader, he's recognizing Jesus' authority. So that says something right there. He even calls him teacher. Now, he's not going to call him Lord like the other one does, but he calls him teacher. He recognizes that there's something different about Jesus in the way that he teaches, the way that he delivers the word. And this is what he's most focused on. That's what's important to him. And then he even goes as far to say, "I will follow you wherever you go." That's a pretty bold claim, isn't it? Jesus, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Now, Matthew hasn't revealed to us where Jesus is ultimately going at this point, right? Now, we're told early on as the announcement is made to his parents that he's going to save his people from their sins, but there's been nothing said about him dying at this point in Matthew's gospel. There's been nothing said about the cross at this point. Now, Luke gives us a companion to this, where in that instance, there's 3 disciples that Jesus has an interaction with. And right before he introduces those 3, he says that Jesus sets his face to Jerusalem, which means it's at the end of his ministry, he's heading to the cross. So Luke is giving us, some word there. Matthew hasn't given us any of that at this point. So these disciples have no idea what Jesus' ultimate mission is. But even that aside, to say, "I'm going to go wherever you go," is pretty impressive. Sounds like a follower, right? I mean, if somebody were to say that to you, I'm going to go wherever you go, I'll do whatever you need me to do, you're going to stop and take notice of that. I think about Ruth and Naomi, as Ruth tells that to Naomi. You know, your God's going to be my God. Your people's going to be my people. Where you lay down your head, I'm going to lay down my head. And she was indeed devoted to Naomi. Could very well be the same situation here. He's given no restrictions. He's given no boundaries. But yet Jesus doesn't welcome them in. If somebody were to say that to us, that would be our first response, I would imagine. Hey, I want to go and partner with you. I want to be where you're at. I want to do the things that you're doing. Well, come on. Let's sign you on the dotted line, whatever it needs to be. Let's do this thing. But notice what Jesus says here. Foxes have dens. Birds of the sky have nests. I don't have a place to lay my head. Jesus now sheds light on his future. And not just his future, but really all of his followers' future. Foxes have places to sleep. Birds have places to sleep. I'm not. In fact, we know that Jesus really doesn't have home. He doesn't have possessions. He relies on the generosity of others, whether it's had a place to sleep or be able to eat or any of those things. Those that are following probably paid for some of these things. So to follow Jesus means that there has to be total dedication and commitment. He's not even guaranteeing a place over this man's head. There could be some nights we're sleeping out under the stars, being like Jacob and using a stone for a pillow. In other words, if you follow me, Jesus says, the only thing I can guarantee you is that you've got me. You might not have anything else, and I'm it. The potential disciple needed to learn that Jesus is worthy of unconditional trust, even if it means giving up earthly security and comforts. Man says, I will follow you everywhere, Jesus. And Jesus points to a place that's going to threaten this man's comfort and security and says, what about there? I mean, it's easy to talk about following Jesus when we're making general statements, when we don't really make specific commitments. Jesus, I'll go wherever you go. I'll do whatever you want me to do. It's easy to say that, particularly if things are going well for us, particularly if we're comfortable, we're secure in the moment and that sort of thing, and life isn't really all that rocky. And it's easy to say, hey, Jesus, I'm in. I'm with you. You obviously know what needs to be done, and so I'm going to follow you. But following Jesus literally means that you go where Jesus goes. And what happens a lot of times, at least here in the Western church, we're going to be, instead of singing I surrender all, we're going to be singing I surrender some. Jesus, I will follow you as long as it's comfortable. Jesus, I will follow you as long as my life doesn't get difficult. Jesus, I will follow you as long as my needs are being met day in and day out. Jesus, I will follow you as long as the sun is shining. Consider the one place you wouldn't go if Jesus was there. If you were to say, Jesus, I'll go wherever you want to go, what would be that one place that he would point to and say, what about there? The most literal way to define a follower of Jesus is someone who goes where Jesus goes. I mean, you can't really call yourself a follower of Jesus if you refuse to go where he went. And so if you want to be able to follow Jesus, we have to know that Jesus is worthy of unconditional trust. Because following him may mean losing everything in this world. Are you okay with that? Can you do that? And you might find yourself like I am, well, I've never been put in that position, that situation. I hope that I would be able to. I hope that I would be willing to. But I really can't say that for sure. Jesus would say, this is the time to count the cost. Builders count the cost before they go and build. Kings count the cost before they go off to war. This is the time to count the cost. This is the time to make sure. Not when times get tough, not when the going gets hard, but now. Jesus, can I truly say that I will go wherever you send me? Do you live with open hands? If you're not doing it now, you're not going to do it when it does get tough. If you're not doing it now, you're not going to do it when he does send you in those places that are difficult. We talked about this last week, and it's a reason to make another point now, but this is yet another problem with the prosperity gospel. Because it makes Jesus a means to the end. If you come to Jesus, you get health. If you come to Jesus, you get wealth. You come to Jesus, you get whatever you want. You name it, you claim it. It's yours. Just fill in the blank. The problem is that we shouldn't come to Jesus to get stuff. We come to Jesus to get Jesus. Jesus is enough. Is he? The song that is pretty popular nowadays, Is He Worthy? Can you say with full assurance, He is worthy? He's worthy. Is Jesus enough for you? If everything else was taken away from you in this world, if everything was taken away from you in eternity, is Jesus enough? And that's not something that I can answer for you. That's not something that anyone else can answer for you. That's something that only you can decide for yourself. That you are in love with who he is and what he's done. That you capture his beauty, you capture his worth, and you're so transfixed by it that you would do whatever it took just to be with him. Jesus is worthy of our unconditional trust. We also see here in this passage that Jesus is worthy of our undivided affection. He's worthy of our undivided affection. Notice 21 there. Lord, another of his disciples said, first, let me go bury my father. In this instance, again, this man seems willing. He wants to accept the invitation. Notice his very first word, Lord. So it's not even teacher. He goes above that. Lord. Matthew says that it's one of his disciples. So he obviously has been following in the crowd for some time now. He's been aware of what Jesus has been doing. He's not new to this process. And this shows that he recognizes Jesus' call is to be taken seriously. But notice his second word. First. First. He wants to follow Jesus. But now it's just not really a good time. Lord, I recognize you with that authority. I want to follow, but I need to put it off for a little bit. Now, why is that? because he wants to go and bury his father. Okay, what's wrong with that, Jesus? Isn't the law demand that he does this, Jesus? I mean, it's a duty to bury your father. It's a religious, social, and family obligation to do so. So this man's request doesn't seem unreasonable, doesn't it? I mean, his father's dead, let him go bury it, and then when the funeral's over with, he can go follow Jesus wherever Jesus needs to go. Doesn't seem to bother Jesus, though, does it? Notice his reply. Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. You're either in or you're out, Jesus says. You can't ride the fence. You can't have, it on either way. You've got to choose. Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. This doesn't sound like the Jesus that I know. The Jesus I know is loving and compassionate. What I see in my mind is, that picture where he's kind of looking off in the distance and he's stroking a little lamb, You've seen that one, haven't you? The glow that's around his head. This Jesus is harsh. Where's his compassion? This man has lost his father. Where's the compassion in this? Why not let him go bury his father and then follow him? What could possibly be wrong with that? Well, there's one of two possibilities that's going on here. One is the father may not be dead at all. It could be just he wants to be able to fulfill the duty to care for his parents in old age, again, which is admirable. And once he's dead, then he will follow. The other possibility is that the father is dead. The problem comes in, though, that the burial process is long and involved. We've seen instances in the scriptures where people have died, and probably what comes to my mind is Lazarus, and he wants to roll back the stone, and what do they tell him? King James Version wise, Lord, he stinketh. All right. So the body is sealed in the tomb. 12 months later, after the body is decomposed, they open the tomb back up, and they put the bones in a bone box. And they continue to mourn a little bit longer after that. In either case, this man wants to put off Jesus for a little while. It'd be like talking to someone today that says, hey, I want to get saved, I want to go to heaven, but I want to live a little bit first. I want to go sow my wild oats. I want to go have fun for a little bit. And let me go have my fun a little bit, and then I'll go follow Jesus. Or I'll wait till my deathbed and make a confession there. Whatever this man's reason is, it's not that he's not willing. It's now's just not a good time. And maybe you resonate with that. Maybe you can sympathize. I want to follow Jesus, but he's not saying no, is he? He's not saying no. He's just saying not right now. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this in Cost of Discipleship. At this critical moment, nothing on earth, however sacred, must be allowed to come between Jesus and the man he has called, not even the law itself. And what Bonhoeffer means here is that as much as of a duty and a rightness there is to this idea of burying the Father, the call to follow Jesus trumps that. It takes more of a precedent. The priority of following Jesus is set above every other priority. It's more important than any family responsibility, even though those are important. What Jesus is doing here is demanding undivided affection. And in recognizing Jesus' sovereign authority in the world, that ought to lead us to giving Jesus the total allegiance of our life. If we recognize that he is sovereignly in control of this world, that includes us. If he is truly king, then he has a right to our life. If he has redeemed us, if he has, upon dying upon the cross, redeemed us unto himself, he has a claim over our life. It reminds me of the Ten Commandments back in Exodus as well as Deuteronomy. I mean, if we grew up in church, we grew up learning the Ten Commandments, memorizing them perhaps. We know the story of how they came about. But it wasn't until older, as I began to really read Scripture for myself, that there's something that stuck out to me that I had never seen before. Before God gives the Ten Commandments to the children of Israel, the very first thing he says is, I am the Lord your God. I have brought you up out of slavery and have delivered you. Therefore, 1 through 10. God is telling the children of Israel, I own you. You belong to me. I have redeemed you to myself. And because I have saved you, these are my expectations. These are my requirements. And it's the same thing for us. We have been redeemed by the precious shed blood of the Lamb. He is King of the universe. And as such, he has rights to our life. So this idea of freedom really isn't a biblical concept. In the manner of me owning my life or me being able to do whatever I want to or be free to do whatever I want to do. Really, Paul paints it well for us. We're either a slave to sin or we're a slave to Christ. There's no other alternative. We're either a slave to sin or we're a slave to Christ. And so because Jesus has died for me, he has rights to my life. And what he expects is total allegiance. His authority is not to be toyed or trifled with. Author J.C. Ryle says, nothing, in fact, has done more harm to Christianity than the practice of filling the ranks of Christ's army with every volunteer who is willing to make a little profession. Let me read that again. Nothing has done more harm to Christianity than the practice of filling the ranks of Christ's army with every volunteer who is willing to make a little profession. What he means by that is that because we're in such a push and we want, to be able to make these claims about how many folks are attending, how many folks that we've baptized, how many folks are participating, that we've just taken anybody. It doesn't matter how much or how little they are committed to Christ. As long as they fill the pew, as long as they take up a position in church, as long as they give, we'll take anybody. We've forgotten that there are requirements and expectations of being a follower of Jesus. Again, look back over this passage. At any point in this passage, has Jesus begged for followers? At any point in this passage, has he invited these men into a relationship with him? No, what is he doing here? He's actually turning them away, isn't he? So that's the thing. If you really do a deep dive into the Gospels, anytime the crowds start getting large and all these people start getting attracted to Jesus and he starts getting all this attention, what does he do? He says something or does something that drives them away, doesn't he? Talk about being a failure at church growth. No, we were thinking, hey, we're attracting more and more people. We're doing something right. We're doing something good. More and more folks are showing up. So we've got to be doing something right. Folks, if that's our criteria, then Jesus was a failure. Because he drove people away from him. Crowds start getting large. Well, you've got to drink my blood and you've got to eat my flesh. Crowds start getting large. He says, you got to take up your cross and follow me. Crowds start getting large. He heals somebody that's taboo. Jesus turns these two disciples here away because he wants unconditional trust and undivided affection from those who will follow him. Remember what we saw last week. When Jesus speaks, leprosy, paralysis, fever, obey. He tells them to get out of there, they leave. So the question is, do we obey that well? Do we obey that easily? Following Jesus means willing to go all in. Back during the Middle Ages, the churches allowed a strange baptism practice for the Knights of Templar. When the knights were baptized, they would be baptized with their swords, but they would not take their swords under the water with them. Instead, they would hold their swords up out of the water while the rest of them was immersed. It was the knight's way of saying to Jesus, you can have control of me, Jesus, but you can't have this. Jesus, I'm all yours, but who I am and what I do in battle, how I use the sword, that's not a part of the deal. Many people will say to Jesus, I will follow you wherever. I will follow you whenever. And Jesus points to what you're hiding and says, but what about that? See, when you accept the invitation of Jesus to follow him, you're not just saying he's the top priority of your life. You're saying he is the only priority in your life. And all those other things, family, whatever, they fall underneath that. They flow out of him being your top and only priority. In fact, you can't get those other things right if you don't have that right. So hear me when I say this. The reason that Jesus is so adamant about his followers surrendering everything is because the reality is this. That one thing that we are most reluctant to give up is the one thing that truly has our heart. Not Jesus. He's not sitting upon the throne. He's not king in your life. He doesn't have authority in your life. That one thing that you're most reluctant to give up is your king. It is what's sitting upon your throne. It is competing for your allegiance to Jesus. The one thing that Matthew doesn't tell us in all of this is how these men respond. We don't see it anywhere in this passage. Luke does the same thing. We're not given these men's responses. We're left asking the question, do they embrace his message gladly? Do they end up joining him in this journey, even all the way to the cross? Or do they turn away in sadness like the rich young fool ruler? In the end, Matthew has left us the responsibility to provide the answer here. And what happens is, in doing so, it invites you and I into this narrative. Really, our story is just a part of God's story anyway. It gives us the opportunity to reflect and ask ourselves, how would I respond? If Jesus were to say this to me, how would I respond? How would you respond? Is Jesus worthy of your complete trust? Is he worthy of your undivided affection? Are you willing to submit yourself to his authority over your life? And no one else can make that decision for you. What will you choose? Let's pray.